Thanks. All right. Good. Let's pin myself. Good morning. We get to pick up and continue along with Sefer Bereshit. Are the announcements? Chodesh Tov. It's the first day of the new month of December. I feel like there are no fancy announcements that have to be announced. Am I right? Is there something going on? All right. Let's look to you that, all right, good then. We get to dive in. People are okay? All right. The bracha for Torah study, because that's what we're going to do, is Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu asher kiddushanu v'yisotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. We're looking at Bereshit, and it's possible, right? Thanks. And it's possible that even likely that today we will get past chapter 1. I think I feel like we got up to. Did we get through the 6th day? Did we get to the 6th day? Remind me. I should write this stuff down more clearly. We started the 6th day because we were talking about I'm looking at chapter 1, verse 26, because we got to the second half of the first day, right? So the first half of the 6th day, there's land animals are created, right? The earth is to. By the way, though, I want to highlight something. This again. In the close read, if go back a moment, right? Like the chapter 1, verse 24. Look closely at what's going on here. And God said, "Let the earth bring out living beings by their kind, domestic animal and creeping thing, and wild animals of the earth by their kind." And it was so. And God made the wild animals of the earth by their kind, and the domestic animals by their kind, and every creeping thing of the ground by their kind. And God saw that it was good. Now, a close read of that. You don't have to share a book. We got 1,500 of them. I forbid it. What are you looking at here? Take this one. That's the expanded version. What the Eitz Chaim is like a fifth of that. Lynn, like that's sort of like the 5-volume JPS, that like the above the line commentary in the Eitz Chaim is sort of like a condensed version of what's in that book. So it's just anyway. I want you to look closely at verse 24. And God said, "Let the earth bring out living beings by their kind, animals, blah, 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 blah." So based on that, what's supposed to happen next? Let the earth bring out animals. So what should happen? Animals. Who's going to create how are the animals going to be created? Coming out of the earth. Let the earth bring out animals, right? Like, so that, like, to remember, like and then look what happens in verse 25. And God made the wild animals. So what didn't happen? Flora, you grab the door. The wild animals didn't come out of the earth, even though that's the clear implication of the first part, right? This happened before. If you remember, like in day 3, parallel thing. Day 6, day 3, parallel days. If you divide the sort of into groupings of 3, like on day 3, God says the earth should sprout grass, should grass, and it says the earth brought forth grass. Like whatever the difference is, there's a different verb involved here. Here, God commands the earth to do something, and the earth doesn't do it. Or it doesn't do it to God's satisfaction. Seeing God feels like, I gotta do it myself. Whatever that is, there's something, there's already, again, a gap in what's going on. That's part of what's the first half. And the second half is what we talked about. I feel like this is where we talked about last time. Verse 26, the second half of day 6. And God said, "Let us make a human in our image, according to our likeness. Let them dominate the fish of the sea and the birds of the skies, and all the domestic animals and all the earth, and all the creeping things that creep on the earth." And God the wild beasts. Oh, meaning that Right. Well, why not the wild beasts? Because they're wild. You can't dominate the wild beasts. That's the again. So if the writer is writing in the land of Israel, like Israel back in the day had lions and bears, right? We know this from both the archaeological record and the fact that they write about lions and bears. So it was a scary thing. And yeah. So you can't. So humans, by definition, don't get to dominate wild beasts. Domesticated beasts have at it. What were our options on this unusual formulation? Let us make a human in our image, according to our likeness. Na'aseh Adam b'tzalmeinu kidmoteinu. Right? The first person plural. 3 times the first person plural. And then, by the way, note verse 27, and God created the human in his image. Singular. Yeah. Right. The V'ya'as Elohim et chaya haaretz leminea, et behema leminea, et kol haremes ha'adamah leminehu, v'yeru Elohim ki tov. By their kind. That seems, the implication is whether or not they would be able to use the term. I feel like their implication is their species. That these are going to be self-propagating entities, and the by their kind is that these different groupings will exist, and that like will mate with like and produce like. Right. So foxes are going to breed with other foxes, and they're going to produce more foxes that are going to look more or less similar to the earlier fox. And it's not going to be that the horse is going to mate with the platypus and they're going to produce some sort of weird hybrid. I think that's what the writer has in mind. Does that make sense? Yes. Before that, by their kind, it may indicate, unlike the Adam, which seems to imply that there's one, this could be that there are many. So by their kind means there's a flock of seagulls, right? Which based on day 5, on day 5, and God said, let the waters swarm with a swarm of living beings, let birds fly over the earth on the face of the surface of the sky. And there everything is plural. So here, by their kind could just be bunches of oxen or whatever, right? So I think that's what it's going with. But the language is terse and feels and it leaves you begging for more. Well, you can't be too literal, but also it's just open for interpretation, because it just leaves a lot of space there. Where the Torah is going to give you lots of details, very precisely on how to bring a sacrifice or how to dress the Kohen Gadol. But here, when you're begging for information, it gives you 8 words. So yeah, so I think it just means species, like by like, and groups of them. And we know this is plural, right? Chayot, plural animals. Yeah. Sure.
There's a note in the 26th.
Mm-hmm.
Rabbi Moses HaKohen, the Sephardi, the effect that all other life was brought forth by the earth and water, but God and the angels created man.
Right. So that and the angels is then the explanation of us.
Yeah.
Right. Though the punchline is that, which is trying to, I feel like trying to sound pious. It brings in angels as co-creators, which may or may not be necessary. And there's no angels up to now, and there's certainly no statement of creation for angels. Like, so that, by the way, is a standard explanation. Who's the us? Well, there's a heavenly host, there's angels and things like this. But of course there is no, and God said, hey, I want angels so I can have somebody to hang out with so I don't get lonely. Like that doesn't, like that statement isn't there, but it's assumed because we're going to know that they're angels because they are, they're all over the Tanakh, right? And all over the Siddur, like Chayim V'Ofanim V'Chayot HaKodesh, right? Like the Vakara Zeh. We have lots of instances of angels existing, but they don't get a let there be moment. However,
God said to the ministering angels who had been created on the second day of creation.
Yeah. So right, Art School fills in that they, certainly based on the Midrash, that angels are created on the second day. So yeah, I mean, there's lots of things that don't get a let there be. So yeah, angels are one option. That's the let us. Or again, like animals are the other option, like that humans are a combination of godliness, reason, moral choice, and animalness. Eating, defecating, procreating, right? Like sort of like these sort of essentially animal functions, and these divine functions are combined uniquely in the human, and that the us is the antecedent are the animals, and God, and that's the combination. And so let us make a human in our image, according to our
There was
likeness.
also,
Yeah,
I mentioned last week, the Hertz commentary that us is idiomatic way in Hebrew of expressing deliberation, as if us meant, it doesn't make sense. Deliberation meaning he thought carefully before making man.
right. I'm not aware of anywhere else where that happens. So could be is one thing. Far be it for me to argue with the august Rabbi Dr. Hertz. And I don't know anywhere else where that happens. And everyone here is stretching to find an answer to something to which there's one, no clear answer, two, no good answer that can sort of be like, oh, that makes sense. And three, it's so clearly not an error. I mean, because it happens 3 times in one sentence, the first person plural. So it's super problematic. And there it is. And that's part of the beauty of the text. And how does the Torah become the Torah? Partly by inviting discussion and argument. If it was clear, then it wouldn't be so fascinating, at least to me. Second half of the sentence. Let them dominate the fish of the sea and the birds of the skies and the domestic animals and all the earth and all the creeping things that creep on the earth. Now, what's that? You can be the boss. Not can be, but should be. This is humanity. And by the way, you can find, if you went to Slichot, that's what I talked about. You can find in some environmental circles blame for all of the environmental ills on the world on, say it with me, the Jews. Because of this line, that's the Jews putting into the world this idea of like, oh, you know what you're supposed to do? Dominate the world. Does everyone have, like, there are different translations floating around? Does everyone have dominate or some version of this? Right, so I don't know that y'all can trace it to this, that this sort of like is the start of an attitude towards not living in harmony with the earth, but of like paving, 15 lanes of the parkway. Like, I don't know if like that's sort of like the necessary end of this line. Because again, like there are two things going on. You have this dominate, then you have in the Garden of Eden story, we'll get to in a moment. The Adam and Eve are told to till and to tend, of Dan Shomra, to work and to guard the garden. So I really think there are two things going on at once, and also like this seems to be part of like maybe the human role that of being stewards of the earth. He translates dominate as well. Subdue. Yes, article is subdue and rule. Hold sway is alter. Okay. That's what I was about to look at. And let the hold sway. How does he justify it? Oh yeah, so hold sway. The verb radah is not the normal Hebrew word for rule. The latter is reflected in dominion of verse 16, and most of the context in which it occurs seem to suggest an absolute or even fierce exercise of mastery. So hold sway, control. So it does have a sense of like, this is yours to like try to work with. And this is definitely, so like, what's the point of these stories? In part, what's your role in the world? What's the purpose of humanity? And part of that is going to be like a don't assume what you could assume, which is that since God made it, keep it exactly the way it is. It's not your job to try and, because God looked at it and said it was good. So you could read that and say, maintain it exactly. You're a house sitter, right? If you're house sitting for somebody, what's your job? Not to redecorate. Not to be like, ugh, I can't believe she doesn't see that this clashes. I'm redoing it, right? That's not what they expect when they get back from Hawaii. They expect you just to be the guardian of it. This is saying not that, by the way. And this is there's a great rabbinic midrash that says just this, that the king, I mean, go into the whole midrash because I like it. The king says has two servants and says, I want you to look after this stuff that I have. And he gives each of his servants a pile of flax and a pile of raw wheat, etc. And he comes back a year later, and one guy has taken all the wheat and ground it and made it into flour and made it into chalot and taken the flax and weaved it into a tablecloth and a challah cover and the whole bit. And the other guy has left it exactly the same. And the king says, this over here is lovely. You seem not to have like really been so ambitious in what you're attempting. And like that, so this is the traditional view of it, is that we're here not just to pave 15 lanes of parkway, but to try and make what we're given into something beautiful, and not just to leave it as it is. We're not just house sitters. Right? First Arlene, then Ed.
That seems to be could be taken advantage of to almost to do something like threat to it.
Yes.
The thing is that has been positive caring for dominate seems like there could be a little negative piece. I don't hear that out of the text because
Right. The hold sway is something different. Dominate, I mean, obviously, like the word is, nobody wants to be dominated, right? Or, you know, in a family classroom, at least. Like it's a, Everett Fox uses subdue. Let us make humankind in our image according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea. Have dominion. Have dominion is a step back from dominate. It seems to be a control of, but still, it's a control of. It's higher. But what it undoubtedly is hierarchical. You're not the servant. Humans are meant to be the ones in charge.
According to Rashi,
Baruch Hashem.
He says, when man is worthy, he has dominion over the animal kingdom. When he is not, he descends below their level, and the animals rule over him.
Yes, yeah. Very good, right. Yes, Lashon Hazeh, Lashon Radui. So he reads it that the Hebrew Virdu can have the meaning of rule and Yerida, decline or go down. That the root there can mean both rule and in different contexts can have the Yared, to go down. So so that's if you act properly, then you're in charge, and if you act improperly, you fall down.
Does dominion also mean guard? You have control over and must guard.
You get that will be in the second creation story. Here, maybe. Does it mean guard? Maybe. 28, verse 28. Vayavarach otam Elohim, vayomer lahem Elohim, pruvu mlu haaretz, kusha v'yadu v'gadat hayam v'of hashamayim v'chol chaya romes al haaretz. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth, and subdue it, and dominate the fish of the sea, or hold sway over, and the birds of the sky, and every animal that creeps on the earth. So, like, whatever it is, it's framed as a blessing, that this is a positive thing, because the Vayavarech, that and God blessed, is explicit. So no matter how you understand it, it's supposed to be a good thing. Now, again, what does that mean? Does that mean 12 lanes of hour, things like that? And of course, I don't know if you I would argue that any society that has begun to civilize over the course of the past many thousands of years dominates their environment, even if they weren't paving 15 lanes of parkway, right? So I just finished reading this week 1493. Like, the Charles Mann wrote two great books, one called 1491, one 1493, about what the world like before Europe collided with the Americas, and one sort of like what was the what's the effect of that having happened. And he speaks and he writes in detail of how Europeans looked at the American environment, both in North and South America, and thought it was wild, and didn't realize that it had been carefully cultivated for centuries and centuries and centuries by indigenous Americans. They just did it differently than the way Europeans did it, but that the land was very carefully cultivated, both in North and South America and Central America, like all around. Just Europeans couldn't recognize it because it was done differently than what they were used to. So certainly in the Americas, they were still dominating, even though it was happening differently.
Rabbi?
Yep.
I think what we're seeing here, and I noticed it the last time, is an implicit, embedded chain of being. This is in Christian thought, but that it's also embedded here in the fact that humankind is in God's image, and
Right.
God is superior to all, and
Right.
somehow humankind, we can parse that later. Somehow humankind is definitely above animal kind, plant kind, etc. This chain of being is very, very prevalent in all Christian thought and in all history. And it's hierarchical. And that's, I think, where all this parsing and discussion of dominance, swaying, whether it's compassionate or not, it's still a hierarchy of power. And I read it that way.
And no, so I think it's definitely hierarchical. we'll move on from it with the, and I think you're absolutely right there. Move on from it. Robert or Richard Elliott Friedman's comment on that, on subdue and dominate in the God's blessing. He writes, incredibly, some have interpreted this command to mean that humans have permission to abuse the earth and animal and plant life, as if a command from God to rule did not imply to be a good ruler, right? Like he takes as a given that everything is supposed to be good, and given from what we know of this God, like demands sort of goodness and moral behavior, that the implication is like obviously be a good ruler, like that's sort of like what doesn't need to be spelled out. Verse 29, moving forward. And God said, "Vayomer Elohim, Hine natati lachem et kol esav zora asher al pnei haaretz al kol ha'etz asher bo pri ha'etz zara zora lechem yeh le'ochla." Listen to this one carefully. And God said, "Here, I have placed all the vegetation that produces seed that is on the face of all the earth for you, and every tree which has in it the fruit of a tree producing seed. It will be food for you." Verse 30, and for all the wild animals of the earth, and for all the birds of the skies, and for all the creeping things on the earth, everything in which there is a living being, every plant of vegetation for food. And it was so. So that is a really convoluted phrase. What's it saying? Everyone's a vegetarian. Like that, all the plants, all the trees, that's yours for food. And then there's this weird thing of like, oh, and all the animals and birds and fish, plants for food. They're all herbivores. That seems to be the direct statement. And again, this is part of it, right? So this is going to be like the lead into the and one that is a coloration on the whole dominate part. Like the assumption then is that this is the concession in the Noah story, that when, you know, so famously they'll say that, you know, everyone's supposed to be an herbivore and people are just going around slaughtering each other and shedding blood and everyone's misbehaving, including the animals. And God's like, all right. If you have a bloodlust, channel it this way. Don't channel it that way. If you need to kill something, kill a chicken and have it for lunch, breaded, maybe blackened. But don't kill each other. And that seems to be like the sense of it. Take your urges and channel them to something productive when you find them channeled into when you find them sort of like spinning out of control. Yeah.
Why do you have to dominate if you're not covering the animals and the growing things if you're not
Eating them? Well, I would say still. That's our modern, that's a very modern perspective, because they would certainly use animals for beasts of burden, and the like, in plowing fields. Because this seems to assume the Torah is going to assume an agricultural society. It sort of zaps over hunter-gatherer stage pretty quickly. I mean, that might be the Garden of Eden, but they get around to pretty quickly having to plant things. So that.
You said urges. People's urges in the image of God, are the urges part of the God that
Right, or is that the animal part, right? Is the sense of that it should be controlled. I would say that I actually do like the animal God, like mashup on the let us make humanity in our image bit. Broadly speaking, like the animals can't misuse, to use the obvious example, their sexual function, right? Like there's no wrong way for a dog to mate, right? They're going to do it, and there's no moral overlay on it. There is a moral overlay on how humans use our sexuality, right? So the the need and the urge and all of that, that's part of like the created aspect, the animal-like aspect. It's no different, but how we approach it and the sense that this is something more than just a urge or a function or something that can be used or misused, that's the divine part. So yeah, I actually think that this is, that a lot of this is, I read it sexually, but that I'll do.
I mean, when he created the animals, he says, be fruitful and multiply. And then
Right.
he creates man and says, be fruitful and multiply.
Right.
Why do you say it twice?
Right. Well, one for the animals, one for people. So the twice is, why does God say fruitful and multiply for animals and for people? And I think it's that they're separate creations, and people are seen as similar to, they're both created on day 6, which doesn't have to happen, right? People could have gotten their own day and they don't. So like that's in itself significant. And then but they're also separate from, so connected to, but separate from. People should also be fruitful and multiply. And also, again, that's what you're supposed to be doing. And again, that's vayavrach, that's a blessing. And that's sort of the part of, procreating is good. Part of like Jewish thought, like sort of begins flowing from this moment, that this is not something that is in line with, like I said a moment ago, about like sort of having a moral way of procreating, like that sex itself isn't shameful. This is something that is a positive, and it's not something, and while it can be misused, that doesn't mean you should be ashamed of it.
Isn't this also considered the first mitzvah?
Yeah, this is the first mitzvah, right? Yeah. So it's a common source of, USY jokes and things like this. Double mitzvah and Shabbat, blah, 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 blah. Like, yeah. So, but it's that. And again, like this is every so often I get asked, like when I'm sort of off in the, outside of my bubble, people are like, oh, are rabbis allowed to marry? Like, because people have Catholicism in their minds often as a default. From here, it is again seen as a blessing.
Many of each species, and commentary about why they and
Well, and maybe not even that, right? Right. Because right. So
like we started with
right. So that's part of the thing, right? Because here, well, yeah. So it doesn't make any sense, right? Like that's verse 27, which we didn't quite pull apart entirely. I assumed that we would actually get to the end of chapter 2 today, but that's not happening. And verse 27, God created the human, Adam. Like Adam here is clearly not a proper name, Adam, my middle name. It means human, and it probably doesn't mean man. And God created the human in his image. God has given him a masculine pronoun. Though I think Alter does a nice thing that this Friedman does a nice thing. God always takes a masculine pronoun. And that it's grammatical, not anything else. That in relation actually to this line, because if there's only one human, what would gender mean? If there's one, it sort of like doesn't imply anything. So either way, there's one God. So you can't have a flip side of a he. So Friedman's comment is, in the present age, many people choose not to conceive of the deity as male or female. In the Torah, however, there are passages which one cannot help but understand and translate a divine reference as masculine. The Torah depicts God as male. Rather than impose the present view on an ancient text, I feel bound to leave the masculine references to the deity as they are. I urge those who study the Torah to contemplate what this has meant through the ages from time to time, the writing of the Torah into their own respective times. The must have been an altar then. Yeah, Robert Alter notes that the hymn in Hebrew is grammatically, but not anatomically masculine. Feminist critics have raised the question as to whether here, in the second account of human origins in chapter 2, Adam is to be imagined as sexually undifferentiated until the fashioning of women. But though that proposal leads to certain dizzying paradoxes in following the story. So here, it seems that there's one being created. God created the human, Adam, singular, in God's own image. He created it, Bra'oto, singular. God creates it or him. There's no gender neutral direct object in Hebrew. So it and him are the same. You can translate either way, whichever you like. In the image of God, he created them, plural, male and female. So that sentence doesn't make sense. There's like no way to make sense of it because there's one being created and that's emphasized, oto, one. And then male and female, he created them. So the rabbis might be familiar, think that this is a either two-headed being or a two-faced being, that the first Adam here is male on one side and female on the other side, and that the creation in chapter 2, the creating of woman from the side is really just like taking a chisel and like carving out, like it's just sort of like having the thing that's there. It's not a rib being formed from as a seed, but rather it's an entire side, as it were, that's being created. So, but if it's one being, how can they be fruitful and multiply? I don't know if this was your question, Ron. How can they be fruitful and multiply if there's just one, or if there or if they're set up in a way that would, I don't want to and wouldn't encourage you to try to imagine like how it would even work, right? Like Right. Is it an animal splitting? But yeah, so it doesn't make sense, and it's not. I think it is totally not clear what's going on. Is it one or is it multiple? Is it male and female at the same time, or a hermaphroditic being? Certainly, by the time we get to chapter 2, possibly in 2022. There's only one, right? That's the whole point, is that Adam is alone without a female. So in chapter 2, yeah, so it's hard to make sense of it. Ooh. Right, and then why only, right, one or a couple, right? Why don't, right. So I don't know, the Midrash that I did recognize as your question, just didn't answer it properly. Like what comes to mind there is the Midrash, the famous Midrash on that, to show how great God is. When people make coins from a mint, they all the coins look the same, that come from the same mold, but God creates humanity as out of the same couple, and they all look different, and that this is how wonderful God is, and human diversity exists despite that. I think that may actually be the case. What we like to say, to pat ourselves on the back of this story, may in fact be the case, that they wanted to say that all humanity comes from one source. And look at what happens if they do want to say, well, two things. One, maybe more likely, one God, the image of one God is going to be in one creation. And the animals, not in the image of God, you can have a bunch. The fish, not in the image of God, you can have a bunch, whatever. But the one God is going to have one creation, and that could be polemical. right? Like meaning that people who would think that that there are many gods out there, and so God creates many people. Like, and also the us, like is that like, so one becomes important to indicate that it's one and not many, reflecting God. And possibly this might be less likely, though it's possible. Like it's certainly like the ethical take on it is that look what happens with we all come from Noah, and the three sons of Noah are made into a hierarchy, right? Of Ham, Noah's son is seen as Africans and lower, and Shem is this group and Yafat is that group, and they become, and everyone's like sort of, and everyone's competing with each other. So even when there were only three people to be descended from, as it were, people created a hierarchy of higher and lower. And part of the point of maybe coming from one is you're not higher or lower, you all come from the same source. And if you think you're better than somebody else, check again. So, and all vegetarians. Verse 31. Elohim et kol asher asa v'hine tov ma'od ve'erev voker yom ha-shishi. And God saw everything that he had made, and here it was very good. And there was evening, there was morning, the sixth day. So that's where we get the uniquely in this story, ma'od, right? The tov ma'od. Everything was good, or most things were good. Here you get a very good. Humans don't get their own special tov. They only get like this sort of the general thing. And as we sort of hit like that, on the book, yeah.
The explanation from here is Russian. The reason it says very good is because in the aggregate, what he had done, which is 6 days, he was happy with.
Right.
So each one was good, but the whole creation was very good.
Yes, and the one of the great midrashim is the good is that's the Yetzer HaTov, the good inclination. Tov ma'od, the very good, the very is the evil inclination. That this is sort of the act of being able to choose or being able to channel your negative inclinations into something positive. That's what raises that's what's going to raise people to a higher level, is the ability to do that. And then this is the prime example on chapters are later inventions. The chapters are used in all Jewish sources, but are only, I don't know, something like 12, 13, 1400 years old and of Christian origin. So all the chapter headings of chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3 come from Christian Bibles, but Jews sort of saw them like, oh, that's good, and adopted them. So even in medieval editions of the Talmud, like you'll see that they use the same chapter headings. So the verses differ sometimes between Christian and Jewish Bibles. So every so often you'll see them count verses differently. But the chapter headings are pretty standard across the board. And I say that only because this is the beginning of chapter 2. And the reason that, and this is the most significant differentiation in it, which is that a Jewish editor would have made the next 3-4 verses part of chapter 1, but a Christian editor puts it into chapter 2 because all the things that need creating have been done. And the 6 days of creation are finished. But a Jewish editor would have looked at this and been like, creation isn't finished. Right? So chapter 2, verse 1. Ve'echulu hashamayim va'aretz v'kol tzva'am v'chel Elohim b'yom hashvi'i ve'malachto asher asa ve'yishbot b'yom hashvi'i mikol malachto asher asa v'rechlim et yom hashvi'i ve'kedesh oto kivo shabbat mikol malachto asher bara Elohim la'asot. Savri. All right, so this is the beginning of Kiddush, from Friday night. And the heavens and the earth. So again, like this would, like, is this part of the creation story or part of something else? Probably should be still in chapter 1. And the heavens and the earth and all of their array were finished. And in the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done and ceased in the seventh day from all his work that he had done. And God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because he had ceased in it from doing all his work, which God had created. So bit by bit, the heavens and the earth and all their array were finished. So that part of the story has ended, is thing 1. And the seventh day, God finished his work that God had done and ceased in the seventh day. Vayishbot, obviously is related to Shabbat, either stopped or ceased or rested from all the work that God had done. There's this weird repetition, and God blessed. So there's a few things that have been blessed. The animals were blessed to be fruitful and multiply, and people the same. And now the seventh day is blessed. God blessed the seventh day, v'kadeshoto, and sanctified it. Kadesh, sanctified, separate, elevated, right? Something like that. That's something that's different and elevated. Because on it, God sees from all the work, Asher bara Elohim la'asot, which he translates as doing all his work with God had created, or literally, for doing all the work that God had created to do.
He finished his work that day? Does that mean that he did a little work in the morning and it was done?
No, so on the seventh day, God finished his work. Oh, you're saying that, does that mean, like, if I finished today, that means that I did something today and then stopped, right? You could say ceased. Would it be the same with God ceased his work on that day? You could read it either way. You could read it either way, though every other day in which something is done, that thing is described. Whereas here, there's nothing described as having happened. If anything is created, it could be the creating of Shabbat, and the work is sanctifying. But yeah, if there's work being done, it's not done, because it begins with the heavens and the earth and all their array were finished. Friedman notes the 7-day week is found in cultures around the world, presumably because of the association with the sun, moon, and 5 planets. They're visible to the naked eye, right? So that's the difference here, is that it's being attributed to God rather than to the gods, right? So people would worship the heavens and earth, and so they worship the sun. So the sun gets a day, which is called Sunday, and the moon gets a day, which is called Monday, right? And Saturn gets a day, which is, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So, more evident in the French, right? Mardi, Mars Day.
And then Norse
Like
gods get in there.
Thor, right? Thor's Day, fish fries.
Maybe the 6th day is why do they just refer to them in the fourth and other one?
And all their array.
Please follow the animal.
And list it. Right. Where the listing is chosen to happen and not is sometimes somewhat baffling. This section of the Torah, this chapter 1, and the sort of spillover, is very terse and very brief. And the style here is not list-y. Chapter 5 will become very list-y, but here they're not so much into listing. So it's just like, yep, all of it. And this also, if you look at the verse 1 is in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. So here it's and God finished the heavens and the earth and all their array, right? So it's sort of like I think it's meant to envelope like one to the other, and like when you see heavens and earth, you're like called back to the beginning, and it sort of like gives you a sense of completeness. So yeah, it's quick. Also, people, by this point, when you're saying Kiddush, you really want to get to dinner. So if you listed everything, it would just go on too long. The Birchat Hamazon is a long time, and that's after you're sated. So it's not, people aren't as anxious after they've eaten. Yeah. So yeah. Why God rests? Why God does, well, that's the big question. Why is there anything? Yes. So that's the ultimate question of existence. And yeah, I mean, right, one, on everything. Two, first I want to note that again, the central question that you want answered isn't answered, meaning sort of like this, and God created the world in order to, and like that line, which is really what you want, isn't there. So the purpose in doing any of this isn't actually addressed. The guess is what's the purpose of life? Is that God created out of love to create beings in God's image is the key thing, to who'd be capable of transcending themselves and like sort of like reaching a higher plane. That it's by loving and caring for each other, by like doing the mitzvot like this, that we become more godlike and create sort of like a higher level of joy and happiness and fulfillment in the world than otherwise would be. Because in theory, and that God delights in that in the same way that people delight in sort of like being with those they love, or in seeing those they love flourish, be it a spouse or a child or a friend or whatever it might be, and that God creates, and this is the whole hierarchy of like the point, because here it makes it seem that the point of the earth is for humans to be on it, right? That's the hierarchy, so it all leads up to. Is for people to flourish, and that seeing people flourishing gives God pleasure the same way that you get pleasure by seeing your grandchildren playing or whatever the case may be. So like this. That's the assumption of what's behind it. And that's the part of the blessing. And there's like the first move on some level is the creating Shabbat, which the rest of the Torah will make clear is like for us to relax and enjoy ourselves on. Right? Like it's not that the purpose of existence isn't to dominate the world only, but also to rest. Right. And without that, like that's part of the complete picture is relaxing and enjoying yourself. So this, yeah, but it's a great question because it's the question.
Getting back to Myron's thing, Abraham ibn Ezra remarks that finishing work is not the same as doing work, but is the equivalent of doing nothing. Hence, Scripture states that he did no work on the seventh day, but rested thereon.
The equivalent of doing nothing. So, Shabbos, there's an assumption, right? So there's an assumption, there's a lot you can say about that about the seventh day. It is because why would God have to rest if things were primarily created by speech? Though, as we said with animals, like it seemed that God had to do the work. God's self, even after asking the earth to do it, commanding the earth to do it, and the earth doesn't do it. But yeah, the resting is a strange moment. Assume that that's a pedagogical thing. I do want to throw in, because there are requests for Midrashim, and this is one of my favorites. In Pirkei Avot, chapter 5, Mishnah 8, 10 things were created on the eve of Shabbat at twilight. And this is so at the 6th day of creation, at twilight, just before Shabbat comes in, that moment where you're like, when's candlelighting? Like that moment when you realize that everything I have to get done that I haven't thought about, I have to get done right now. There are 10 things that God realizes I want to have in the 6th day, and they need to be created, but I gotta jam them in right here. Eluhan, these are they. The mouth of the earth, the mouth of the well, the speech of the donkey, the rainbow, the manna, the rod, the shamir, the script, the writing instrument, and tablets. Meaning, the mouth of the earth, the mouth of the earth that's going to swallow Korach and his rebellious faction when they rebel against Moses is created on the 6th day of creation, and it's waiting there in the Sinai for Korach to rebel and to go against Moses and to lose his fight with him, and like the mouth then is right there for him to be eaten up. The mouth of the well, same thing, same book of Numbers vis-a-vis Miriam. And the well, like the miraculous well, that was already there, just waiting for Miriam to be there. The speech of the donkey from the Balaam story, that the donkey was already there, ready to talk, waiting for that story to happen. The rainbow, the Noah story, was ready to go, waiting for the Noah story to happen. The manna, not miraculous, created on the 6th day at twilight, waiting for the Israelites to go through the wilderness. The rod, Moshe's staff, doesn't magically turn. It's not that there are staffs that magically turn the state. There was one, and God made it. The shamir, that's the worm. If you know, like the temple, the altar can't be made of hewn stones, can't be made from stones where metal implements have been used to hit it. So how do you get a sharp edge on that? There's a shamir, a miraculous worm that is a worm or snail or whatever. It goes over the stone, it cuts through the stone and makes it fall off. So that's how the altar could look nice without having metal implements used on it. The script, the writing on the 10 commandments was miraculous, went right through the stone. That was created on the twilight on 6th day of creation. The writing instrument that was used to create those letters. The tablets themselves of the 10 commandments were made. Others add v'yeshomrim. Some say demons, angels on the 2nd day, demons on the 6th. The burial place of Moses, pre-dug the grave for Moses, waiting for Moses to get there. The ram for our father Abraham, stuck in the thicket from the 6th day of creation. He just didn't notice that it was there in the thicket, waiting for the binding of Isaac. And some add tongs, which must be made with tongs. And that's my favorite part, because you can see them saying, I know that to make tongs, you have to hold the new tongs in the fire, but to hold the tongs in the fire, you need a pair of tongs to do that. So that must mean that on the 6th day of creation, God created a primordial set of tongs in order to hold, so that all other tongs could be made. So my favorite part of the creation story is that the unspoken part is that God created the first set of primordial tongs.
Well, the thing about the 7th day, and it's from Rashi and Swarno, and they indicate that God did create on the 7th day. He created rest. That hadn't been there, wasn't part of this.
Right.
The first 6 days of creation, he created rest on the 7th day.
Nice. So
And that's
right, Shabbat finishes creation, and we'll finish our class on the same note. I was all ready for chapter 2. Oh yeah, we did do chapter 2, but really the part of chapter 2 that doesn't deserve to be chapter 2. So that finishes the first creation story. And if you look